The arena fell silent the moment Dr. Mara Chen stepped onto the crystalline mat, her boots clicking softly against a surface designed to absorb the impact of warriors 10 times her mass. Across from her, Vorath Krell, 7 feet of muscle and chitin, champion of the Galactic Trials for 12 consecutive cycles, raised one clawed hand in salute, his mandibles clicking in what might have been amusement. He had never lost. She had never expected to be here. Vorath's voice rumbled through the translators embedded in the arena's walls. "You are the final obstacle between me and legend, human. I will make this quick." Mara didn't respond. She simply adjusted the brace on her left wrist, the one she'd worn since the accident that ended her surgical career 3 years ago. The crowd, thousands of beings from hundreds of worlds, leaned forward in their seats. Some had wagered fortunes on this match. Others had traveled light years just to witness the conclusion of the tournament that determined which species would lead the Council's new peacekeeping force. But Mara wasn't thinking about politics or glory. She was thinking about the small wooden calendar her daughter had made for her 10th birthday, the one that still sat on her desk back on Earth with a gold star marking today's date. She was thinking about the promise she'd made to come home. Vorath lunged. Mara had been a neurosurgeon once, one of the best, according to the journals that published her work on spinal regeneration protocols. That was before the tremor in her left hand became impossible to hide, before the diagnosis that ended her career in an afternoon. She'd spent 2 years adrift after that, volunteering at a community center in Seattle, teaching self-defense to kids who needed somewhere safe to go after school. She never imagined that would lead her here. The Galactic Council had opened its trials to humanity only 6 months ago, a gesture of diplomacy after Earth's admission as a provisional member species. Most species sent their military elites, warriors bred for combat, enhanced with genetic modifications or cybernetic implants. Earth sent volunteers. Mara had signed up on a whim, thinking she'd be eliminated in the first round. She won her first match by accident. Her opponent, a towering Corinthian with 4 arms, had assumed she'd fight like the other human contestants, aggressive, reckless, fueled by adrenaline. Instead, Mara had waited. She'd studied the way he shifted his weight before each strike, the slight hesitation in his third arm. When he overextended, she'd simply stepped aside and let momentum do the rest. He'd crashed into the barrier field with enough force to crack 2 ribs. The second match had been harder. Her opponent was faster, more cautious. Mara had won by targeting a nerve cluster she'd learned about in medical school, a pressure point specific to his species that caused temporary paralysis. The crowd had booed. Vorath, watching from his private box, had laughed. By the 5th match, people started paying attention. By the 10th, they started calling her the Ghost because of the way she seemed to disappear just before an attack landed. Mara didn't think of herself as a fighter. She thought of herself as someone who understood bodies, how they moved, where they broke, what they could and couldn't survive. Now, standing across from Vorath in the final match, she understood exactly how outmatched she was. Vorath was a Krell, a species engineered for war during the Coalition's expansion era. His exoskeleton could withstand small arms fire. His reflexes operated on a timescale measured in milliseconds. He'd won his first trial at age 16 and hadn't lost a single match since. Bookmakers across the galaxy had stopped taking bets on his victories years ago. Mara had watched recordings of every match he'd fought in the past decade. She'd studied the way he moved, the patterns in his attacks, the rare moments when his guard dropped. She'd found exactly 3 exploitable weaknesses, and 2 of them required equipment she didn't have. The third required her to let him get close enough to kill her. The match began with a sound like distant thunder, the barrier field activating, sealing them inside a dome of shimmering energy. Vorath didn't waste time with posturing. He charged, his movements a blur of calculated violence. Mara sidestepped the first strike, feeling the displacement of air as his fist passed inches from her face. She didn't try to counter, not yet. She needed to see how he adapted. He adapted fast. His second strike came from an unexpected angle, a sweeping kick aimed at her center mass. Mara dropped into a crouch, letting it pass overhead and rolled to her left. Vorath's follow-up strike cratered the mat where she'd been standing. The crowd roared. Vorath's mandibles clicked in what might have been approval. "You're faster than the others," he said, circling her with predatory precision. "But speed won't save you." Mara didn't answer. She was counting. 1, 2, 3, measuring the rhythm of his breathing, the micro-adjustments in his stance. He favored his right side by 0.03 seconds. It was barely perceptible, but it was there. She feinted left. Vorath's response was instant, a grab aimed at her shoulder that would have ended the match if it connected. Mara twisted away, her brace catching on his clawed hand for just a moment, long enough. She felt the tremor in her wrist, the familiar weakness that had ended her career. But she also felt something else, the slight give in Vorath's grip, the fraction of a second where his attention split between maintaining his hold and adjusting his balance. Mara drove her knee upward, not into his armored torso, but into the joint where his leg met his hip. It wasn't enough to hurt him, but it was enough to shift his weight. Vorath stumbled just a step, just enough for the crowd to fall silent. He recovered instantly, but his mandibles had stopped clicking. When he looked at her again, there was something new in his eyes, respect. The match paused at the 15-minute mark, a mandatory rest period enforced by council regulations. Mara retreated to her corner where her coach, a retired Terran Marine named Sarah Okonkwo, waited with water and a medkit. "You're doing good," Sarah said quietly, checking Mara's vitals on a handheld scanner. "Better than good, you're making him work for it." Mara nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Her wrist ached. Her ribs hurt from a glancing blow she'd taken in the 8th minute. But more than that, she was tired, bone-deep tired in a way that had nothing to do with physical exertion. She thought about her daughter, Lily, back on Earth, 10 years old and already smarter than Mara had been at twice her age. Lily had made her promise to call after the match, win or lose. Mara had promised. "He's going to change tactics," Sarah said, her voice cutting through Mara's thoughts. "You hurt his pride. He'll come at you harder now. I know, you also know you can forfeit." "No shame in it, you've already gone further than anyone expected." Mara looked up at the scoreboard hovering above the arena. Humanity's flag, a small blue marble against a field of stars, glowed next to her name. Vorath's flag, a crimson spiral representing the Krell Collective, blazed beside his. If she forfeited, humanity would lose its chance to lead the peacekeeping force. Another species would take that role, and Earth would remain a provisional member for another decade. Her daughter would grow up in a galaxy where humanity was still an afterthought. "I'm not forfeiting," Mara said. Sarah nodded once, unsurprised. "Then let's talk strategy." They had 90 seconds. Sarah spoke quickly, sketching diagrams on a digital pad, highlighting the weak points Mara had already identified. But as the countdown ticked towards 0, Sarah added something new. "There's one more thing," she said, "his spine." Mara frowned. "His exoskeleton protects." "Not the exoskeleton, the vertebrae underneath. Krell physiology is different from ours. Their spinal column has a flexibility joint right at the base of the neck. It's what lets them rotate their heads a full 180, but it's also a structural weakness. If you can get leverage there," the buzzer sounded. Time was up. Mara stood, her mind racing through anatomical diagrams she'd memorized in medical school. She'd never worked on a Krell patient, but she understood the principle. Every species had a breaking point. The question was whether she could reach it before Vorath reached hers. The second round began with a different energy. Vorath moved more cautiously now, testing her defenses with feints and probing strikes. Mara gave ground, letting him push her toward the edge of the arena. The crowd sensed blood. They chanted Vorath's name in a dozen languages, the sound building into a wall of noise that pressed against Mara's skull. She ignored it. She was watching Vorath's neck, the way he tilted his head when he prepared to strike, the micro-rotation that preceded every major attack. He lunged. Mara dodged, but this time she didn't retreat. She stepped inside his guard, close enough to smell the metallic tang of his exoskeleton, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body. Vorath's eyes widened. For the first time in 12 years, someone had surprised him. Mara drove her elbow upward, aiming not for his armor but for the gap beneath his jaw where chitin met flesh. The strike connected. Vorath roared, stumbling backward. The crowd erupted. Mara didn't pause. She moved with him, staying inside his reach, targeting the joints where his armor was thinnest. Each strike was precise, calculated. She wasn't trying to hurt him, she was testing his structure, mapping the architecture of his body. Vorath caught her wrist on the 5th strike. His grip was crushing, his claws digging through the brace and into her skin. Mara gasped, her vision blurring with pain. "You fight well," Vorath growled, pulling her closer. "But this ends now." He raised his free hand, claws extending. The strike would be fatal if it landed. Mara didn't try to pull away. Instead, she stepped forward into his embrace and wrapped her free arm around his neck. For a heartbeat, they were frozen there, locked together in something that might have been a dance or a death grip. Then Mara whispered, "Congratulations," and she snapped her body to the left. The sound was wet and wrong, a sharp crack that echoed through the arena like a gunshot. Vorath's eyes went wide, his mandibles stopped clicking, his grip on Mara's wrist loosened. He dropped. The arena went silent. Not the expectant silence of a crowd waiting for a climax, but the stunned silence of something impossible witnessed. Vorath Krell, undefeated champion of the Galactic Trials, lay motionless on the crystalline mat, his body twisted at an unnatural angle. Mara stood over him, breathing hard, her left wrist bleeding where his claws had pierced skin. She felt nothing, no triumph, no relief. Just a hollow ache where adrenaline had been. The referee, a synthetic being designed specifically for impartiality, floated down from its observation platform. Its sensors swept over Vorath's body, assessing vitals. "Spinal displacement confirmed," the referee announced in a voice like wind chimes. "Non-fatal, medical intervention required," match concluded. "Victory, Mara Chen, Earth." The crowd exploded, some cheered, others screamed in outrage. Currency changed hands in 1,000 different denominations. On Earth, billions watched screens in stunned silence as a woman they'd never heard of became the first human to win the Galactic Trials. Mara barely registered any of it. She was staring at Vorath, at the way his chest still rose and fell, at the medics rushing onto the mat with equipment designed to stabilize his spine. She'd broken him. Not killed him, she'd been careful, precise, targeting the exact vertebra Sarah had identified, but broken nonetheless. And in that moment, standing in an arena light years from home, Mara understood the weight of what she'd done. Sarah appeared at her side, wrapping a thermal blanket around her shoulders. "You did it," Sarah said quietly. "You actually did it." Mara nodded mutely, her wrist throbbed, her daughter's calendar felt very far away. The medics lifted Vorath onto a hovering stretcher. As they carried him past, his eyes opened, just a sliver, just enough to meet Mara's gaze. His mandibles twitched. "Congratulations," he whispered through the translator. Then they carried him away. The aftermath was chaos. Press drones swarmed the arena, their lenses tracking Mara's every movement. Council representatives appeared with contracts and proposals. Species ambassadors who had dismissed humanity 6 months ago now sought audiences. Earth's provisional status was upgraded on the spot. Mara endured it all with the same quiet focus she'd brought to the match. She answered questions she didn't care about, shook hands with beings whose names she forgot immediately, and signed documents that would shape humanity's future. But when the media circus finally cleared, when the arena emptied and the lights dimmed, she found herself alone in the medical bay where Vorath was recovering. He was awake. The spinal brace encasing his neck glowed softly with regenerative tech, and monitors tracked the gradual knitting of damaged tissue. He'd make a full recovery, the medics said. He'd even fight again if he wanted to. "Why are you here?" Vorath asked when he noticed her. His voice was rough, strained by pain or medication. Mara sat in the chair beside his bed. "I wanted to make sure you were okay." Vorath's mandibles clicked softly. "I've never been okay a day in my life. I was bred for war, engineered for victory. Okay was never part of the design. I'm sorry. For what you won, you fought with honor. You gave me something I haven't had in 12 years. What's that? A reason to improve." Mara smiled faintly. "You're taking this better than I expected." Vorath attempted to shrug, winced, and settled for a slight tilt of his head. "I've spent 12 years believing I was unbeatable. Today you taught me I was wrong. That's valuable, painful, but valuable." They sat in silence for a while, the only sound the soft beeping of medical equipment and the distant hum of the arena's ventilation systems. "What will you do now?" Vorath asked eventually. Mara thought about Earth, about her daughter's calendar and the community center where she taught self-defense to kids who needed somewhere safe. She thought about the contracts waiting for her signature, the responsibility of leading a peacekeeping force she'd never asked to command. "I'm going to call my daughter," she said, "and then I'm going to figure out what comes next." Vorath's mandibles clicked again, a sound that might have been laughter. "Practical, I respect that." Mara stood to leave, but Vorath's voice stopped her at the door. "Human," she turned, "your species is strange, weak by most standards, but you have something we don't, something I didn't understand until today. What's that? You know how to lose." And that makes you dangerous. Mara considered that. I'm not sure that's a compliment. It's the highest compliment I can give. The call with Lily happened 3 hours later after Mara had finally escaped to a quiet room in the council's residential quarters. Her daughter's face filled the screen, her eyes wide with excitement. "Mom, you're on every channel, they're saying you're a hero." Mara smiled, though it felt fragile. "I'm the same person I was yesterday, sweetheart, just a little more famous. But you won, you beat the unbeatable guy." "That's so cool." "It was complicated." Lily's excitement dimmed slightly. She'd always been perceptive, able to read Mara's moods even across light years of distance. "Are you okay?" Mara opened her mouth to say yes, to offer the reassurance her daughter needed. But the word caught in her throat. She thought about Vorath's spine snapping beneath her hands. She thought about the weight of leadership she'd never wanted. She thought about the tremor in her wrist that had ended one career and somehow led to another. "I don't know," she admitted. "I won. I did what I came here to do, but I'm not sure I did the right thing." Lily was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Did you hurt him on purpose, like to be mean?" "No, I did what I had to do to win." "And is he going to be okay?" "Yes, he'll recover." "Then you did the right thing, Mom. You're not mean, you're careful, you're always careful." Mara felt something loosen in her chest, a knot she hadn't realized was there. "When did you get so wise?" "I had a good teacher." They talked for another hour about small things: Lily's science project, the neighbor's cat, the weather in Seattle. By the time the call ended, Mara felt lighter, not healed but steadier. She slept that night without nightmares. The council convened the next morning to formalize humanity's new role. Mara attended in the simple jacket she'd worn to the arena, refusing the ceremonial robes they'd offered. Sarah stood beside her, along with a delegation of Earth representatives who looked simultaneously thrilled and terrified. The Counselor Prime, a being of pure energy contained in a crystalline matrix, addressed the assembly. "The trials exist to test not just strength but character. Dr. Chen has demonstrated both. Earth will lead the peacekeeping force, effective immediately." Applause rippled through the chamber, though Mara noticed several species whose representatives didn't join in. Politics would continue. Old grudges wouldn't disappear overnight, but something had shifted. Humanity had proven it belonged here, not as conquerors or warriors, but as something else, something the galaxy hadn't quite figured out yet. After the ceremony, Mara found herself in a garden on the Council's orbital station, a carefully engineered space designed to accommodate flora from 100 worlds. She was admiring a tree with bioluminescent leaves when Vorath approached, moving stiffly in his spinal brace. "Doctor," he said by way of greeting. "Champion," Mara replied. "Former champion, if you say so." Vorath settled onto a bench designed for beings twice his size. "I've been thinking about what you said about being careful. I didn't say that, my daughter did. Still, it resonates. I've spent my entire life seeking perfection in combat. I thought that meant never losing, but perhaps there's perfection in knowing when to let go." Mara sat beside him. "What will you do now? Train, recover, perhaps challenge you to a rematch in a few years?" "I'd like that." They sat in comfortable silence, watching bioluminescent pollen drift through the artificial breeze. Somewhere in the distance, Earth turned on its axis, carrying Mara's daughter through another ordinary day. And for the first time since stepping onto the arena floor, Mara felt something other than doubt. She felt ready. 6 months later, Mara stood in the same community center where she'd taught self-defense classes before the trials. The walls were the same faded green, the mats the same worn synthetic fiber, but everything had changed. The Council had granted Earth resources to establish peacekeeping training facilities on every inhabited continent. This center, her center, had been chosen as the primary location. Students from across the galaxy came here now, learning not just combat techniques but the philosophy behind them. Mara had named the program after Lily's calendar, the Gold Star Initiative, not because of glory or victory, but because of promises kept. She watched her current class practice defensive maneuvers, a mix of human teenagers and young adults from 3 other species, all learning to move with patience rather than aggression. Vorath stood at the back of the room, observing. His spine had healed completely and he'd volunteered to serve as a training advisor. "They're getting better," he said quietly as the class ended. "They're learning to think," Mara corrected. "That's more important, is it? You tell me. You're the one who lost for the first time and decided it was valuable." Vorath's mandibles clicked. The sound Mara had learned meant amusement. Fair point. As the students filed out, chattering in a dozen languages, Mara caught sight of Lily waiting by the door. She'd insisted on helping with the program, serving as a teaching assistant despite being the youngest person involved. Ready to go home? Lily asked. Mara looked around the center, at the worn mats, the faded walls, the tree visible through the window that someone had decorated with gold star ornaments. She thought about arenas and crowds and choices made in the space between heartbeats. Yeah, she said, I'm ready. They walked out together into the Seattle evening, leaving the lights on behind them for tomorrow's class. Somewhere above, the Council's orbital station continued its slow rotation around Earth. Somewhere in the archives, recordings of the final match played on eternal loop. But here now, in this moment, Mara was exactly where she needed to be. The gold stars on Lily's calendar would keep marking days. Promises would keep being made and kept. And humanity would keep learning what it meant to be part of something larger than itself, one careful step at a time.